In the heart of the Horn of Africa lies a nation whose name has become synonymous with crisis, chaos, and collapse. That nation is Somalia. Once a thriving coastal hub of trade and culture, Somalia's descent into anarchy began with the fall of its central government in 1991, triggering a devastating civil war that shattered families, cities, and national identity. What followed was a haunting tale of warlords, famine, piracy, and foreign interventions that gripped the world's attention, yet failed to offer lasting peace. But the Somali crisis is more than just headlines of Black Hawk Down or pirate-infested waters. It is the story of a people struggling to reclaim their nation from the ashes of war. A story of resilience amid suffering and survival amid statelessness. How did Somalia spiral into one of the longest-running humanitarian disasters of our time? Who are the players, foreign and domestic, who shaped its fate? And what does the future hold for this fractured land? In this video, we dive deep into the roots of Somalia's collapse, the rise of Islamist insurgency, the impact of foreign involvement, and the undying hope of a nation longing to rise again. This is the Somali crisis, raw, complex, and unresolved. To understand Somalia's collapse, one must begin with its colonial roots. By the late 19th century, the scramble for Africa saw European powers carve up the continent. Somalia was no exception. The British established a protectorate in the north in 1887, British Somaliland, while the Italians took control of the south in the 1880s and 1890s, Italian Somaliland. France seized a portion of Somali territory, now known as Djibouti, while parts of the Somali population remained in what became Ethiopia and Kenya. This fragmentation sowed the seeds of future irredentist tensions. Colonial rule brought infrastructure development and modern administration, but also deepened divisions, disrupted traditional authority structures, and exploited local populations. Resistance to foreign domination was fierce. One of the most iconic figures in Somali resistance was Syed Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, who led a 21-year rebellion, 1899 to 1920, against British, Italian, and Ethiopian forces. He is remembered as a nationalist hero who sought to unite all Somalis under one Islamic government. After World War II, global winds of change began to favor decolonization. Italian Somaliland came under United Nations trusteeship in 1950 but remained under Italian administration. British Somaliland gained internal autonomy in 1960. A powerful pan-Somali nationalist movement emerged during this time, calling for the unification of all Somali territories, including those in neighboring countries. On June 26, 1960, British Somaliland achieved independence. Just 5 days later, on July 1, 1960, it voluntarily merged with Italian Somaliland, which gained its own independence that day, to form the Somali Republic. The unification was hailed across the Somali world as a triumph of nationalist aspirations. Aden Abdulle Osman became the country's first president, and a democratic system was adopted. The newly independent Somalia aimed to promote unity, democracy, and pan-Somali nationalism. However, the dream of a greater Somalia that included all Somali inhabited regions led to tensions and conflicts with Ethiopia and Kenya. Nonetheless, the 1960s marked a hopeful period when Somalia embraced self-rule, joined the United Nations, and pursued a vision of development and national pride, before political instability and dictatorship would derail that vision in the decades to come. The Somali Civil War is one of the longest-running and most complex conflicts in modern African history. What began in the late 1980s as a rebellion against an authoritarian regime soon exploded into a multifaceted, clan-driven civil war that shattered the Somali state, destroyed institutions, and caused immense human suffering. The war's roots lie not in one single event or decision, but in a dense web of historical legacies, colonial distortions, clan dynamics, state failure, authoritarianism, economic decline, and regional rivalries. This video explores, in depth, the major causes of the Somali Civil War. First, post-independence nationalism and the illusion of unity. Somalia gained independence in 1960 through the merger of British Somaliland, June 26, and Italian Somaliland, July 1, forming the Somali Republic. Initially, the union was marked by hope, nationalism, and democratic governance. However, beneath the surface, regional and clan-based grievances simmered. The northern region, former British Somaliland, felt politically and economically marginalized in the union. Government appointments, infrastructure development, and foreign aid disproportionately favored the southern region, former Italian Somaliland, causing resentment among northerners. Although Somalia appeared unified, clan loyalties remained stronger than national identity. The Somali political system operated on a fragile clan-based, power-sharing formula that often privileged certain groups over others. The illusion of unity masked an increasingly divided society. Second, Siad Barre's dictatorship and clan favoritism. In 1969, following the assassination of President Abdirashid Ali Shamarke, General Mohammed Siad Barre seized power in a bloodless coup. He suspended the constitution, banned political parties, and declared Somalia a socialist state based on scientific socialism, inspired by the Soviet Union and China. At first, Barre's regime achieved significant gains. Literacy campaigns, infrastructure projects, and anti-corruption measures were implemented. He positioned himself as a modernizer and pan-Somali nationalist. However, these early successes were soon overshadowed by his increasing reliance on authoritarianism and clan-based favoritism. Although Barre publicly denounced clanism as backward and divisive, his regime covertly relied on it. He favored his own clan, the Marehan, part of the larger Darod clan family, along with allied clans, Ogaden and Dulbahante, forming the so-called Maudi alliance. State institutions, the military and intelligence services were dominated by members of these groups. This deeply alienated other major clans, especially the Isaac in the north and the Hawiye in central regions. As dissent grew, Barre's government became increasingly repressive. Opponents were imprisoned, tortured, or executed. His reliance on military power and clan loyalty created a brittle state apparatus that could not withstand internal rebellion. The Ogaden War and its fallout, 1977 to 1978. A major turning point came in 1977, when Siad Barre launched a military campaign to annex Ethiopia's Ogaden region, home to ethnic Somalis. Initially successful, Somalia's army advanced deep into Ethiopian territory. However, the Soviet Union, once Somalia's key ally, switched sides to support Ethiopia, providing it with massive military aid and Cuban troops. Somalia was decisively defeated. The Ogaden War proved disastrous for Somalia, both militarily and economically. The defeat humiliated the Somali regime, discredited its pan-Somali aspirations, and caused massive financial strain. Barre broke ties with the Soviet Union and aligned with the United States, but the economic and political damage had been done. The war also created thousands of refugees and displaced persons, straining local communities and government resources. Many Somalis lost faith in Barre's leadership, and dissent grew stronger across regions and clans. The Ogaden debacle marked the beginning of Somalia's descent into instability. 4. Competition over foreign aid. Competition over foreign aid played a crucial role in fueling and prolonging the Somali Civil War. When the central government collapsed in 1991, international humanitarian agencies rushed into Somalia to address famine and mass displacement. However, with no functioning state authority, warlords and clan militias quickly moved to control ports, airports, and distribution centers where food and medical aid arrived. These groups began seizing shipments, taxing aid convoys, and using relief supplies as a form of currency to buy weapons, recruit fighters, and strengthen their power bases. Instead of aid reaching civilians, it became a strategic resource the militias fought over, especially in Mogadishu. The struggle to dominate aid routes intensified rivalries between warlords, like General Adid and Ali Mahdi, as controlling humanitarian relief meant political and military advantage. Warlords had little incentive to cooperate or build peace, turning aid into a driver of conflict rather than relief. 5. Economic decline and corruption. The 1980s saw Somalia plunge into a deep economic crisis. The failure of socialist policies, coupled with reduced foreign aid and mounting debt, created economic stagnation. Public services deteriorated, inflation soared, and unemployment became widespread. Corruption became rampant. The elite, especially those linked to the ruling clan alliance, looted state resources. Foreign aid, instead of supporting development, was funneled into private accounts or used to buy loyalty from clan leaders and warlords. As the economy collapsed, so too did the regime's legitimacy. Widespread poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity pushed many young Somalis toward rebellion or criminality. 6th, formation of armed opposition movements. By the mid-1980s, several armed opposition movements had emerged, fueled by resentment toward Barre's regime and his clan-based oppression. These groups were often organized along clan lines and received support from neighboring countries. Somali National Movement, SNM, based in the north and primarily representing the Isaac clan, the SNM waged an armed struggle against Barre's forces in Somaliland. United Somali Congress, USC. Dominated by the Hawiye clan, the USC operated in central Somalia and became one of the most powerful rebel factions. Somali Patriotic Movement, SPM. Linked to the Ogaden clan, the SPM operated in the south. Somali Salvation Democratic Front, SSDF, primarily based in the northeast among the Majateen clan. These groups gained momentum, arms, and legitimacy, especially after Barre's brutal military campaigns began targeting civilian populations. 7. Human rights abuses and massacres. In response to rebel activity, Barre launched indiscriminate and brutal military campaigns, particularly in the north. The most infamous was the 1988 bombing of Hargeisa, where the Somali Air Force targeted civilian neighborhoods. Thousands of people were killed, and over 400,000 fled to neighboring Ethiopia. Amnesty International and other human rights groups documented mass executions, torture, rape, and the use of landmines. Whole villages were destroyed in counterinsurgency operations. The Isaac clan bore the brunt of these atrocities, leading some analysts to describe the Hargeisa massacre as an act of genocide. These actions delegitimized the central government entirely in the eyes of many Somalis. Barre, once seen as a nationalist hero, was now viewed as a dictator who ruled through fear and bloodshed. 8. Breakdown of the military and state institutions. As opposition groups grew in strength, Barre's army fragmented along clan lines. Soldiers began deserting or defecting to rebel groups. The national police, intelligence services, and civil service were weakened by years of politicization and mismanagement. With the state's institutions crumbling, clan militias filled the void. Armed groups formed to protect territories, control trade routes, or assert clan dominance. These militias would later evolve into the warlords who dominated Somalia after Barre's fall. The absence of a neutral functioning national army or police force meant that once Barre fell, there would be no mechanism to ensure order or transition, a fact that would prove catastrophic. 9. Regional interference and proxy conflicts. Somalia's internal conflicts were further fueled by intervention from neighboring countries. Ethiopia supported various Somali rebel groups to weaken Barre's government, especially after the Ogaden War. Libya, Sudan, and other Arab nations provided arms and ideological support to certain factions. The United States and Italy, former allies of Barre, largely ignored the growing crisis during the 1980s, despite mounting evidence of human rights abuses and impending state collapse. These outside interventions provided the rebel groups with weapons, funding, and training, turning local grievances into a full-scale militarized conflict. The Cold War further complicated the dynamics, with superpowers viewing Somalia through ideological lenses rather than focusing on stability or justice. In January 1991, President Siad Barre fled Mogadishu as USC forces led by General Mohammed Farah Aidid took control of the capital. However, victory quickly turned to chaos. Power struggles erupted within the USC between Aidid and Ali Mahdi Mohammed, both from the Hawiye clan. Fighting between their factions devastated Mogadishu, turning the once thriving city into a battlefield. With no central authority, Somalia became a warlord-dominated state. Major cities and regions fell under the control of clan militias. Southern Somalia, especially, became a patchwork of competing warlords, each enforcing their own rule. In the north, however, the Somali National Movement, SNM, declared the independence of Somaliland in May 1991. Although not internationally recognized, Somaliland established relative peace and governance. Meanwhile, Puntland, in northeastern Somalia, declared itself an autonomous region in 1998 under Abdullahi Yusuf but did not seek full independence. The situation in the south rapidly deteriorated. Civilians suffered immensely as basic services collapsed, famine spread, and violence became routine. Armed groups controlled food aid, and looting was widespread. The international community responded with humanitarian intervention. In 1992, as famine and violence intensified, the United Nations authorized a humanitarian mission in Somalia. The US led Operation Restore Hope, landing thousands of troops to protect aid distribution. Initially welcomed, the operation quickly soured. Tensions rose between US-UN forces and warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid, whose militia saw foreign troops as threats to his authority. In October 1993, the infamous Battle of Mogadishu occurred when US Rangers attempted to capture Aidid's top lieutenants. The operation failed, resulting in the deaths of 18 US soldiers and hundreds of Somalis. Images of a dead American soldier dragged through the streets shocked the world. By 1995, the US and UN withdrew, admitting failure. Somalia was abandoned to its warlords once again. The departure of foreign forces left a power vacuum, and the violence resumed unchecked. Following Aidid's death in 1996, no single faction was able to dominate Somalia. The country remained fragmented. Clan-based administrations emerged in regions like Bay, Bakul, Jubaland, and Gedo, each run by local warlords or businessmen. Amid the chaos, Islamic courts began to gain influence, especially in Mogadishu. These courts, based on Sharia law, were initially community-led efforts to provide justice and security where the state had failed. Over time, they united into a powerful coalition known as the Islamic Courts Union, ICU. Simultaneously, Ethiopia and other regional actors began backing various factions. Ethiopia supported secular warlords to prevent the rise of Islamist movements that could destabilize its eastern border. Eritrea, Ethiopia's rival, backed Islamist groups to counterbalance Ethiopia. Despite numerous peace conferences held in Djibouti, Egypt, and Kenya, no lasting solution was found. Dozens of transitional governments were announced in exile, but failed to govern Somalia effectively. In 2004, a transitional federal government, TFG, was formed in Kenya with international support. However, it was weak, unpopular, and unable to enter Mogadishu until much later. By 2006, the Islamic Courts Union had taken control of much of southern Somalia, including Mogadishu. The ICU brought relative peace to the capital for the first time in years by disarming militias and reopening schools, and markets. Many Somalis welcomed the stability. However, the ICU also had radical elements, and its leadership included figures accused of links to Al-Qaeda. The ICU's rise alarmed the TFG and its backer, Ethiopia. In December 2006, Ethiopian troops, backed by the US and with TFG support, invaded Somalia and ousted the ICU in a matter of weeks. The ICU fled, and its radical wing went underground. The Ethiopian occupation was deeply unpopular, sparking a new insurgency. Out of the ashes of the ICU, a more radical group emerged, Harakat al-Shabaab al-Mujahideen, or simply Al-Shabaab. Initially part of the ICU's youth militia, Al-Shabaab evolved into an extremist jihadist group with global ambitions and allegiance to Al-Qaeda. Al-Shabaab launched a fierce insurgency against the Ethiopian-backed TFG, using guerrilla tactics, suicide bombings, and assassinations. They gained control of vast areas in southern and central Somalia, including key towns and ports. In 2009, facing heavy resistance and mounting casualties, Ethiopia withdrew from Somalia. The TFG returned to Mogadishu, but it remained weak. Al-Shabaab continued to grow, eventually imposing a harsh interpretation of Sharia law in areas under its control. Meanwhile, Somali politics remained fragile. Elections were delayed, marred by allegations of fraud, clan rivalry, and corruption. The federal system, with semi-autonomous states like Jubaland, Puntland, and Galmudug, often clashed with the central government over power sharing and resource control. In 2017, Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo became president. His administration launched a renewed offensive against Al-Shabaab but struggled with internal divisions, weak institutions, and donor fatigue. Tensions with Kenya, Ethiopia's shifting stance, and US drone strikes further complicated the conflict. In 2022, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud returned to power for a second term. His government pledged to intensify the fight against Al-Shabaab and prioritize national reconciliation. In 2023 and 2024, Somali forces launched major offensives in Hirshabelle and Galmudug, with support from clan militias and international partners. Several towns were recaptured, and Al-Shabaab suffered heavy losses. However, the group adapted, retreating to rural strongholds and stepping up suicide attacks in urban areas. Efforts to restructure the Somali National Army, integrate regional forces, and rebuild institutions are ongoing. The withdrawal of AMISOM, now rebranded as ATMIS, is also underway, raising concerns about security gaps. The Somali Civil War, which erupted in 1991 following the ousting of President Siad Barre, has had devastating and far-reaching consequences. What began as a domestic political conflict quickly spiraled into decades of lawlessness, factional fighting, humanitarian collapse, foreign interventions, and the rise of global terrorism. The war not only dismantled the state, but also transformed the social fabric of Somali society and destabilized the entire Horn of Africa region. Its consequences can be broadly categorized into 6 key areas: political collapse, humanitarian crisis, economic destruction, rise of extremism, regional insecurity, and global ramifications. 1. Political collapse and fragmentation. The most immediate and enduring consequence of the Somali Civil War was the total collapse of the central government in 1991. For over a decade, Somalia existed without a functioning national government, legislature, or public institutions. The capital, Mogadishu, became a war zone ruled by rival warlords. Ministries were looted, archives destroyed, and bureaucracies disbanded. Somalia became a textbook example of a failed state. This collapse gave rise to regional fragmentation. In the north, the self-declared Republic of Somaliland broke away in 1991, establishing its own government, military, and institutions, though it remains unrecognized internationally. In the northeast, Puntland declared autonomy in 1998, though it pledged allegiance to a future federal Somalia. Other regions, like Jubaland and Galmudug, operated semi-independently, each with its own militia and leadership. The war also deeply entrenched clan-based politics, which continue to dominate Somali governance. Power sharing among the major clans, Hawiye, Darod, Dir, and Rahanweyn, has replaced ideological or party-based systems. This has made political agreements fragile, and elections are often marred by disputes, violence, and corruption. Efforts to rebuild the state, including multiple peace conferences and the creation of transitional governments, 2000 to 2012, culminated in the Federal Government of Somalia in 2012. However, central authority remains weak, and political instability continues, marked by frequent cabinet reshuffles, electoral delays, and disputes between federal and regional states. 2. Humanitarian catastrophe and mass displacement. The Somali Civil War triggered one of the worst humanitarian crises in recent African history. Millions of Somalis have been displaced internally or have fled as refugees to Kenya, Ethiopia, Yemen, Europe, and North America. As of 2024, the UNHCR estimates over 2 million internally displaced persons, IDPs, in Somalia, and another 900,000 registered refugees abroad. The war led to repeated famines, the most catastrophic of which occurred in 1992 and again in 2011, both killing hundreds of thousands. The collapse of agriculture, looting of food convoys, and blockade of aid by militias created deadly shortages. Al-Shabaab, in later years, banned international aid groups in its territories, worsening the crisis. Healthcare systems were destroyed, leading to outbreaks of cholera, measles, and malaria. Immunization campaigns failed. Malnutrition, especially among children, remains endemic. Access to clean water and sanitation remains extremely limited in war-torn regions. The war also severely affected education. Schools were destroyed or converted into militia bases. An entire generation grew up without formal education, creating a vacuum of skilled workers and professionals. Illiteracy rates remain high, especially among girls. 3. Economic ruin and informal survival economy. Somalia's formal economy was all but destroyed by the civil war. Key sectors, banking, manufacturing, infrastructure, and public services, collapsed. Major ports like Mogadishu and Kismayo were destroyed or fell under militia control. The national airline ceased operations. Roads and bridges were blown apart. With no central bank until the early 2010s, Somalia lacked a regulated currency system. Counterfeit Somali shillings flooded the markets, and the US dollar became the de facto medium of exchange. In many places, livestock trade, informal markets, remittances, and piracy became the main sources of income. Diaspora remittances, estimated at over $1.5 billion annually, became a vital economic lifeline. Families relied on relatives abroad to survive. At the same time, warlords, arms dealers, and smugglers built a war economy based on looting, extortion, and the illegal trade of charcoal, arms, and people. In later years, regions like Somaliland and Puntland began to develop local economies, including livestock exports to Gulf countries, but most of Somalia remains economically underdeveloped, dependent on foreign aid, and vulnerable to shocks. 4. Rise of Islamic extremism and Al-Shabaab. One of the most alarming consequences of the Somali Civil War has been the rise of Islamic extremism, particularly the emergence of Al-Shabaab. In the absence of central governance, radical elements filled the vacuum. Starting in the early 2000s, the militant group gained strength by opposing foreign intervention and promising law and order through Sharia law. Al-Shabaab imposed strict Islamic codes, conducted public executions, amputations, and banned music, cinemas, and Western NGOs. It launched suicide bombings, assassinations, and IED attacks in Somalia and neighboring countries. In 2012, Al-Shabaab officially pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda, becoming part of the global jihadist movement. The group extended its reach by recruiting foreign fighters, including Americans, Europeans, and East Africans. The group's attacks on Kenya, such as the Westgate Mall attack, 2013, and Garissa University massacre, 2015, highlighted the regional threat posed by Somali instability. Al-Shabaab has also targeted AMISOM troops from Uganda, Burundi, and Ethiopia, even as international forces and Somali troops reclaim territory. Al-Shabaab remains a deadly force through its guerrilla tactics and control over rural areas, where it collects taxes and recruits fighters. Fifth, regional destabilization and insecurity. The Somali Civil War has had profound consequences for the broader Horn of Africa region. Neighboring countries, particularly Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti, have all felt the ripple effects of Somalia's instability. Kenya has faced a major influx of Somali refugees, the rise of extremist cells, and several deadly terrorist attacks by Al-Shabaab. The Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya is one of the largest in the world and has strained Kenya's social services and security. Ethiopia intervened militarily in 2006 and again in later years, fearing the spread of Islamist extremism into its Muslim-dominated Ogaden region. Somali militant groups have supported ethnic Somali rebels inside Ethiopia, further straining relations. Piracy off the Somali coast became a global concern between 2005 and 2011. Armed Somali pirates hijacked commercial ships in the Gulf of Aden and Indian Ocean, demanding millions in ransom. Global shipping lanes were disrupted, and a multinational naval force had to be deployed to patrol Somali waters. The conflict also fueled cross-border arms smuggling, human trafficking, and drug trade, affecting Yemen and the wider Arabian Peninsula. Sixth, international military and diplomatic engagement. The prolonged civil war has drawn extensive international intervention. The US, UN, EU, AU, and neighboring states have all been involved, militarily, diplomatically, or through aid. Since 2007, the African Union Mission in Somalia, AMISOM, has played a critical role in fighting Al-Shabaab and stabilizing parts of the country. Thousands of African troops, primarily from Uganda, Burundi, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti, have died in the mission. The United States has conducted drone strikes, trained Somali Special Forces, Danab Brigade, and designated Al-Shabaab as a terrorist organization. It has spent billions in humanitarian and military aid. However, international efforts have often been criticized for being disjointed, overly militarized, and insensitive to Somali political realities. Western backers have supported unpopular governments, and many peace-building initiatives have failed to include local stakeholders meaningfully. Despite massive aid, Somalia remains heavily dependent on external support, and the withdrawal of AMISOM, now restructured as ATMIS, poses future risks. The Somali Civil War devastated the nation, collapsing its government, economy, and institutions, and plunging millions into suffering. For over 3 decades, Somalia endured warlordism, famine, extremism, and regional instability. Yet today, signs of recovery are emerging. A federal government exists, local administrations are functioning, and parts of the economy are rebounding, fueled by diaspora remittances and international aid. However, challenges remain. Al-Shabaab remains active, political divisions persist, and humanitarian needs are high. Despite this, Somalia shows resilience, with a new generation striving for peace, governance, and national unity. The journey is ongoing, but hope for a stable Somalia endures. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching, please do well to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our subsequent videos. See you on our next one.